Hey everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life, and today I'm bringing you the next installment of the Lifting for Life Q&A series. I first want to apologize, as I originally said I was going to do this episode last week and didn't appropriately prioritize. It didn't happen, but I am now. So the question that struck me at the time actually came from a gentleman named Joseph Rakish, whose name I'm probably mispronouncing, but he asked, and he was serious, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I did think about this. I have an answer to it, but this isn't my area. So what I would rather do is explain how I think that question is relevant or perhaps clarifies the relationship between or the role of progressive overload in hypertrophy training. So I first want to take a step back and define progressive overload because I think there's some confusion here. I think some people take progressive overload to mean only increasing external load. For example, if on Monday you squat 235 pounds and then, 235? And then on Thursday you squat 240, you have progressively overloaded because 240 is greater than 235. It's that simple. I do think that's an intuitive approach. And that's probably roughly what I believed very early on. But I think we can come up with scenarios that show that that definition is probably not ideal. Let's say on Monday you squat 225 for 1 rep, and then on Thursday you squat 225 for 5 reps. If progressive overload only means increasing external load, then in that instance you haven't progressively overloaded. The load is the same. However, your volume load is literally 5 times greater. So is the best account of this really to say, no, you haven't instituted progressive overload? I think a better approach would be to say, yeah, that counts as progressive overload, so we just need to update the definition of what we mean. So I take progressive overload roughly to mean progression in the weight room. And I think that one could come up with some good criticisms even of that definition. For example, would using shorter rest times count? Would improving or increasing workout density count as progressive overload? Things like that. But leaving those aside and just looking at the core of it, I think it works better with increasing external load counts if technique is staying the same, doing more reps counts, doing more sets counts, etc. Now, with that out of the way, what is the role of progressive overload in hypertrophy training? 5 or 6 years ago, I probably would have said, well, that's the cause of muscle growth. So you go into the gym and you do whatever you do, and then in the future you do more, and that causes muscle growth. And I think that idea is probably remains fairly common even within the evidence-based community. And at some point I started asking questions like, what happens in the intervening period? Like, is there a period in which you train, nothing happens, and then you train again, and you overload, and then you gain muscle? I think that was probably, that question arose, and also Greg Knuckles made a post about this talking about how he thinks that the relationship is probably, the way we talk about it is the reverse of what's really happening. And I think we can take that and combine that with this traditional idea, and what we get is the chicken and the egg. Effective hypertrophy training causes hypertrophy. Okay, so your muscles are bigger. A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and if other variables like the degree to which you are familiar with an exercise stay the same, so non-muscle size related variables that influence strength stay the same, then you're stronger, and that, I think, results in it being necessary to do more to continue maximizing hypertrophy. Now, I think gains are going to slow down over time regardless, but we're talking about maximizing hypertrophy. So even if the marginal return is, the phrase that came to mind is progressively shittier and shittier, in order to maximize that effect, you're going to need to do more because you're getting stronger. Which is to say that implementing progressive overload is necessary to continue maximizing hypertrophy. So in some sense, progressive overload causes maximal hypertrophy, which then bumps us back to an earlier point where we're talking about then hypertrophy happens, so the muscle's bigger, so you're going to be stronger, and it continues. So that is my view on this topic at this point. Instead of it being as simple as progressive overload causes hypertrophy, and by the way, I don't mean that I didn't even have the thought of this being a critique of Greg or his post. That's really not the intention, and I don't think that he actually believes it's like as simple as hypertrophy means progressive overload is necessary, like it only goes in one direction. But again, I think it's cyclical. Effective whatever it is that you do that actually causes hypertrophy, then you get hypertrophy. Okay, so you have increased strength, assuming these other variables are the same, and then you have to institute progressive overload, and it bumps you back to, all right, more hypertrophy, and so on. So in coming to the end of this video, it strikes me that this might seem a very fascinating discussion that has no practical implications. I think that a practical implication, and I could expand upon this in future videos because it's kind of getting away from answering this question, but is that in the case of hypertrophy training, progressive overload is not the goal. The goal is go in and in any given workout do that which will generate an effective hypertrophic stimulus, and you do that over time. So those acute elevations in muscle protein synthesis happening over and over and over again means muscle growth, because mechanistically that's literally what it is. Muscle protein synthesis isn't some proxy for or marker of muscle growth. It is the actual building of muscle. And again, if that happens consistently enough, that's what causes you to gain muscle at the level you can visually discern. Again, progressive overload is a tool which you implement to maximize your progress, as opposed to being the objective itself. And I think that if one goes in and says, my goal is progressive overload, that is like the point of the training, and that will result in muscle gain, I think there's a risk there of what Eric Helms has called PR chasing. Again, putting progressive overload so far ahead of other things, or just it being the only objective, that things like, maybe even training volume decreases because there's such an emphasis on making progress in terms of external load or whatever it might be. And we know that volume is a major determinant of hypertrophy. Maybe increasing external load or increasing volume in terms of weight, reps, sets is emphasized, and form is really neglected, and that results in increased injury risk. It makes the work you're doing on a per rep basis less effective, etc. And that's right off the top of my head. Honestly, I wasn't even thinking to go in this direction with this discussion. But again, I think there are multiple plausible, and indeed I've seen people make these mistakes in practice, implications of that very reductionist conception of you want to gain muscle, it's progressive overload, especially if you have to be using heavier weight, which I think isn't even the right definition of progressive overload. So again, chicken and the egg. If you're training for hypertrophy, keep in mind that you are training for hypertrophy. Keep things like form, range of motion, exercise selection, number of hard working sets in a workout and over a week, and frequency and so on in mind, while also making progress over time, as opposed to just trying to maximize progress in terms of the weight you're using, setting PRs and so on. So thank you so much for your time, guys. I will see you again very soon. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button. Okay, bye.